Welcome to Content Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to a brand new extra special episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. This is the podcast where we normally bring you two thematically related films, one mainstream and one cult, and talk about them both. But today I have an extra special interview episode with the amazing and lovely Parker Love Bowling. Hello, Parker. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Now, I know that you're always credited as Parker Love Bowling. Do you go by Parker? Do you go by Parker Love? If somebody were to meet you on the street and has you ask you a question, which would you prefer?
Oh, I would just say Parker.
I think I have to say, I love, both you and your sisters, Kansas Bowling, have unique names, and it's instantly recognizable. I remember we reviewed Veronica on this podcast, and Kansas is a small part in the last segment. And I have seen you and your sister's work, and I never would have realized it was her, but because her name is so recognizable, I was like, oh, that was Kansas. Okay, great. So do you think that's a little bonus, like a unique name?
Yeah, it helps, I guess.
It's true. I guess there's really no barometer towards that. So I really wanted to have you on because I'm a big fan of your work and follow your Instagram. And for listeners out there, definitely check out your Instagram. It's at Parker Love Bowling. And you have a lot of great art and promotions and cool things coming up. But
thank you.
Well, let's talk about the aesthetic real quick, because I know you've done you've done a short film. You're working on another short film, correct? And your sister is a filmmaker. You're often in her films as well as other projects. But you have this really cool, I call it like a genuine 70s grindhouse vibe with your style and presentation. And it's really, especially here in the cult film world, like that's sought really hard. And usually it comes across as kind of cheesy. Like you can always tell something that's legitimate, vintage, versus something that is just intended to look that way. And yet with your work, it really looks that way to me. Like it looks like I found a bad transfer somewhere that's just got enough definition to really be attractive. Like, where does that aesthetic come from?
No, I'm kidding.
In the best way possible. That's the best compliment we can give here at Cult and Classic.
The camera I shoot on is like pretty fuzzy, so it's just like a matter of the equipment I have, I guess. Like Kansas's work is definitely like more defined because her camera is a lot better.
Well, and you guys both have experience, right? Because you're the first feature that you were in that Kansas made was BC Butcher, correct?
Yes.
And you were 15, she was 17, somewhere around there. And that was on 16 millimeter, right?
Yeah, she didn't shoot that one.
Okay.
But she basically, I could be wrong here. So I think what she did is she was talking to the cinematographer of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think she was like, what did you shoot on? I love how this movie looks. I want my movie to look exactly like it. And I think he told her the camera, and I think she rented the same one.
That's fantastic. And that is that. Well, that's that 70s grindhouse, right? Like it's sort of the epitome. When I think of that, the most successful sort of grindhouse film I would peg as Hooper's, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it does have that same almost uncorrected proof print look, for film, which is really cool. And I noticed the same thing in the trailer for your brand new book of poetry that's coming out and is available for pre-order now, called Rhododendron. Is it called Rhododendron?
It is called Rhododendron.
Great. And the poem itself that is titled after is called just Rhododendron, correct?
Well, there's 3 poems. There's Rhododendron, and then there's Rhododendron.
That is I would never have known that. That is awesome. So, but I definitely want to have you read a couple of poems here, but I want to ask you, like, where did the desire to came for writing poetry? Because I know that my background is fiction writing, and I have an MFA and all that junk. And oftentimes in the film world, and even the visual arts world, photography and all that, I feel like writing is sort of this distant harder to access area for a lot of people. And I feel like sometimes when you say like, oh, I have a book published, a film person's like, uh-huh, great. And then and then they move on. You know, but all of your work seems to come together and have a similar vibe. And Rhododendron, how did it come about?
Well, I mean, I've always just written poetry, like my whole life, even before I really knew what I was doing. So I basically just had like a big catalog of work, and it was fun to go through it and figure out what was shit and what was good enough to publish. And then there's some of them that I'm like, oh, that poem is shit, but like it's so sentimental that I have to publish it.
Sure. I totally get that.
But I think like last July, my sister came out with a book with this company called Far West Press.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote a book called A Cuddly Toys Companion, which is basically a making of story of her next feature called Cuddly Toys.
Very excited about that. You're in that as well, yes.
I am in that. I am very proud to be in that movie. I think it's really fantastic. But I basically just sent the publisher of her book all my poems, and he liked them. And after that, it was just the process of editing them down, and finally came together in a neat little book. So
what was that process like, sort of, because I don't know, when you wrote, because you have your you made a short film yourself, and you're working on a second one. And I'm trying to remember the name. It's got an awesome name, Our Lady Crucifixion, right?
Yes.
Folks can go find the trailer online and check it out. When you worked on that, I often find that there's more creative control per se, and less checks and balances than when you're working on a manuscript that somebody else is publishing. Is that what you found? And how was that different? Like having the shots called exclusively by you and having someone coming back and saying, hey, what about tweaking this?
That's an interesting question. In my experience though, because it is such a small press, like he gave the publisher named William Crane, he gave a lot of creative control to me, and I basically laid it out in like Word exactly how I wanted it to look. Like he didn't make me cut anything.
That's fantastic.
There were a couple poems that like there was a struggle, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, keeping it. But I mean, if it was a bigger publishing house, then it probably would have been a lot more difficult. But it was interesting to kind of just like give it to somebody else and let it go, opposed to like when I make a short film that's just for me, I can do whatever I want.
And it's interesting too that you said like there were a couple you're like, nope, it's got to be this. And I found too, when talking to a lot of writers I know who are much more well published than me with major houses and things, is that oftentimes as a first or second or third, an early career person publishing, they don't think that they have that ability, to say like, no, there's a reason this is the way it is. And so it's nice to hear that, like you said, working with a small press, you have a little bit more ability to say, no, this is what I want, and take it or leave it. We can move on from there, and to have that. So I'm really excited. And where can people go to pre-order Rhododendron?
Go to farwestpress.com. My poetry book, Rhododendron, is on there. Kansas's book is on there, but I warn you, do not read it if you have not seen the movie yet. And the movie's not officially out till I think the fall. So
I was gonna say I haven't been able to see it yet. So
but I think like the first page of the book, it just says like, warning, you will not understand anything in this book unless you see the movie. But a lot of people have the book and haven't seen the movie, which is funny. And then he also, Far West also put out pre-written letters for your convenience that me and Kansas wrote when we were like 8 and 10.
And I love, you just, right before we started recording, you started telling me about this project. And I have to say, I love the cover art. It totally reminds me of, Ghost World and
thank you. Our friend Elizabeth Zametz did the cover art. She's a really good illustrator.
It's awesome. Tell me a little bit about this book. It's letters that you and Kansas wrote when you guys were like 8 and 10, right?
Yeah, we just had like kind of like a ongoing joke where we would write each other letters to and from fictional people that didn't really make sense. But but we thought how convenient it would be if we put them all in a book for people to cut out and send each other, so you never have to write another letter again. But they're all super specific, so good luck. But I can read a couple if you want.
I would love it. I would absolutely love it. And they're scans, right? You said they're not actually typed. They're the scans of the original letters.
Scans. There's like drawings and like my handwriting when I'm like 8 trying to be cursive that you cannot read at all. But there's some convenient letters in here, like Dear Prezi of the United Steezy, I don't like the way things are run around here. Fix it. Angry American. I'm going off the grid if you keep it up.
I would have to photocopy it because I'm going to have to use that so many times.
You could just cut it straight out of the book. That's how convenient this is.
I think I'm going to need it every 4 years, probably. That's so cool. Can you give us another one?
Yeah. Johnny, things went bad last night. I'm shot. Give all my records to Roger, and you get my rabbit Cherokee. Tell me I love her and give her a kiss. Oh, tell Ma I love her and give her a kiss. See, I can't even read our. I'm sorry.
So it's just like a real letter.
Yeah. But you know, whatever. Love you, Mothro.
That is fantastic. I love it. It's not the same, but it reminds me. You live in LA. Have you been to the Museum of Jurassic Technology before?
I have not.
Okay. So I'm going to have to get them on here sometime. There is a Museum of Jurassic Technology, which for those confused by the title, that's understandable because it means absolutely nothing. But what they do is they have really bizarre displays and features, like things from older museums that are not really museum worthy, like say a stuffed tiger that roars that really isn't a stuffed tiger, it's just the skin of a like weird vintage old things, you know, real kitsch.
I've heard of it. I think someone told me about it before.
Well, they put out a book from an exhibit that they had where they took letters that they had been received over like decades from the Griffith Observatory, and they papered an entire room with it, and you were just going to walk, and they took all the letters and they scanned them in and printed them, and the letters are in that particular case really bonkers because apparently people who have unique ideas about aliens, how to spin yarn into gold,
James Dean fans.
Exactly. They will write to, yes, they will write to the Griffith Observatory or send faxes. And so that's a similar thing. Like, I'd love to have them. I'm gonna have to pick it up just so I can have it next to the book. So
like, I gotta get me a copy.
It's pretty great. I think we might be able to hook you up. I'll let you know. Yeah. So okay. So rhododendron. You say you always, and I assume we're continuing to write poetry. Yeah. What's the span of the book? Is there stuff that you wrote when you were, say, you know, really young to now? Is it more heavy-handed to the now? What's the ratio for you?
I think like the oldest poems in there, I was like 15. And then the newest ones are like as new as like February, like me writing one, like last minute one, be like push it under the in the deadline, like trying to get last minute things in there. But yeah, there's definitely stuff in here that I wrote when I was very young. But I mean, it's not in chronological order, so it's kind of interesting. I'd say like the last fourth of the book is like pretty much in chronological order, so there's more of a story there. Or it's more just what I was going through like at the time I sent in my initial manuscript. But there's stuff thrown in here where I'm like, I don't remember writing that, but the date's like 2014 or whatever.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, so can you read us one?
Yes.
I'm putting you on the spot. I'm like, give us what we want.
A fatal mistake. I spend hours soaking in the tub till I become Parker's soup. And Peter Sellers complains to the waiter, waiter, I thought I ordered Goldie Hawn. No tip for Mr. Waiter.
I love it. I love well, here's the thing. If you know a lot about poetry, or you've taken poetry classes or whatever, or gone to college for writing, whatever, they often talk about like the genuineness of a poem, right? If you come from a place, if you're trying to sound smart or be clever or all these things, so often it falls flat. And I feel like that's similar in any creative endeavor. We can tell the difference between, I mean, not to, I always rip on Michael Bay here. It's what we do. He's fiend of the pod. But like Transformers 3, you can tell the difference between that and.
Haven't seen it.
Well, I'm just gonna be honest. You don't have to, but that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. But you can tell the difference between that and something like, I don't know, Licorice Pizza or whatever. There's just a different level of heart that goes into certain projects, and just that little poem you talked about. You use film and very specific film references to get across the emotion that's happening in the poem. Do you know what I mean?
This book is jam-packed with references and like to movies, to movie stars, to writers, to psychonauts, to everybody.
I love it. And okay, so here's the other thing I want to ask too, because you and your sister as well, but you don't necessarily fit into the traditional mold of I am an actor, I am a writer, I am a director. You're sort of that cool creative renaissance area, right? Like you seem to take projects on because you like creating things. Is that accurate?
I mean, absolutely. I haven't turned down anything because it wasn't creative, but I've turned down auditioning for things because I didn't like it. But I don't think it's worth being in something that you're not excited about.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, if you need the money, we've all done it. But, there are differences, I mean, I remember doing comedy shows in places where I'm like, oh, I am going to not enjoy this, but there's $20 at the end of it. So let's just make it through this set. So that said, you mentioned the book and then the upcoming official release of Cuddly Toys, right? Which is Kansas's new movie, which you're in.
Yes.
I know you're of course not in charge, although you're part of the project. Is there anything you can tell us about that movie? Because I'm really excited for when we can actually see it.
I don't think there's much I can say about it. I think it's going to be released sometime in the fall. So something to look forward to.
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
I think theatrically and Blu-ray.
Very excited.
But I don't know what else I can say besides what's like already online about it.
Sure. Well, and guys, go check it up. Cuddly Toys, look it up.
It's a documentary about delinquent teenagers, shot in like a sort of Mondo-esque fashion.
We love the Mondo, the Mondo documentary. You're like, what you're seeing is absolutely real-ish.
I mean, well, some of it is, some of it's not, and the audience has to guess.
Exactly. And that's sort of what I love about, we just recently here on the pod talked about Paper Heart by Charlene Yee, which is a little bit different. It's a little more, I'd say mainstream. I think it's mainstream effective, even though it didn't reach there. But it's the nice melding of the actual documentary work with the fictional aspect, and they're indistinguishable if it's done effectively. And it does give us this whole new view of legitimacy to things that aren't necessarily legitimate, and perhaps some fantasticalness to things that are real. You know. So very excited about that. I'll definitely and you can tell Kansas will be harassing her to get her on here too. But yeah, so the other thing I want to talk to you about, of course, is you said you make short films for you. And I think that that's a valid thing to do, especially since right now I think the market for short films is a little bit harder. There's a lot of film festivals.
I'm not gonna make money off of this.
Right. That said, though, as I said, Our Lady of Crucifixion, the trailer's out. Is there a way that people can see it? Because it looks so great. I actually saw it and I thought, oh, this reminds me of Herschel Gordon Lewis in a way. Like,
I think that's a big compliment.
Good. Yeah. So is there a way people can see it?
Not yet. I haven't really decided what I'm doing with it yet. There are a couple last minute changes I want to make to the final edit. And then I'm thinking festivals, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Well, let us know, because that's super cool. And I mean, you've got another one that I know that online is always questionable as to what the actual accuracy is, but Boudoir, right, is you're working on as well. What can you tell us about that one?
That one was actually my first directorial project, but I made it when I was 19, and there's an edit of it and everything. It's finished, but now watching it later on, I'm like, there's so much of this I want to change. So I'm gonna add a whole nother section of it and then make what I already did more like dream sequence from the new part of it. So it's kind of also a work in progress.
Very cool. I would love to see a short film collection come out someday, because that would be really good. And I'd love to see, one thing that is always fun is when you can see the original cut versus the final edit as well. And I think that, you know, with a love of movies comes a love of that weird, obscure ephemera that everybody else is like, I just watched the movie, and you're like, yeah, but did you see this cut of the movie?
Oh, no one can see it. I'm mortified by it. Like visually it looks striking, but yeah, not my cup of tea anymore.
There's a lot of life that happens between, you know, whatever, between anywhere in the teens to the 20s, and now that I'm almost I literally have turned 38 today, so I'm a million years old by my own brain. Thank you. Yeah, things change. Things do change. The change does get more subtle, though. I'll say that now I can look back at things that I did in my 20s, like, actually, I really like that. Or, okay, well, maybe I'd approach it differently. But there are a lot of stuff. I'm sure you encountered this with your poetry. There, as you said, there's a lot of stuff that I look at. I'm like, wow, that does not resonate with me anymore. You know, and even films, sometimes we've done some on the pod here where I'm like, man, I loved this movie 15 years ago. And now
what doesn't hold up anymore?
You know, a lot of the stuff that doesn't hold up is the straight up misogyny that is so prevalent. And it's funny because it's not really, we talked about this in the pod. We talked about Christoph Gantz's movie Brotherhood of the Wolf.
I haven't seen it.
It's Mark Dacakis is in it. He's really great. It's a really weird fantasy horror French Revolution period piece, and it is visually stunning, but as it turned out, it's like, okay, it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. And more than that, you just notice the things that I'm like, oh, all of these characters, anyone who's ethnic, anyone who's poor, like as a character, they happen to be poor, anyone who's a woman, they just get sidelined. And now,
yeah, but that's part of the time period too.
It is, but this movie was made in 2009.
No, I know, but it's a period piece, right?
It is a period piece. I mean, that's the thing. And we had panelists on, a good friend of the pad, Jeff, who is, you know, not saying that it's okay to do these things, but understanding, like trying to put it in context. But I do find, especially, well, no, it's fair. Well, I mean, you mentioned Herschel Gordon Lewis, not that they're misogynistic, but 70s films are my favorite, and they are completely unacceptable in so many ways from film now. And I actually feel like I'm not one of those people who defends, you know, questionable material or comedy for any reason. But I will say, I feel like in the 70s, it was understood that this is a movie, it's not real. And the incredibly shocking exploitative things we're seeing, everyone's like, it's easier to remind ourselves that everyone's in on the joke or the material or whatever, right? Like, these are actors. Whereas now I feel like when people put stuff out that they're concerned about, there's this gun shy nature to dog on it. And, you know, it comes with the territory of having people who are either oppressed or put upon in some way. Understandably, I would be gun shy too, but it's hard for me coming from a position as a middle class white hetero cis male. You know, nothing is that hard for me compared to other people. That said, you and your sister entered sort of the film world young and are both women. Have you found, I mean, it's sort of, you guys have such a unique view that I wonder if you guys found a way in by saying, hey, this is how we see things, this is what we want to do, and that's the way it is? Or did you encounter any barriers, you know?
What do you mean?
Oh, that's cute. Well, for example, age, I mean, I know when Kansas and you were involved with BC Butcher, it was, you guys were still teenagers.
Yeah,
And now,
there's definitely more people that it's either like, oh, she's young, I'm not going to listen to her, or like, oh, you're so young, how do you know about this? It's either one or the
yeah,
other.
right. And you're
I
like, actually,
right.
at this point, I probably know more than you do. I mean, speaking of which, you and Kansas were in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino, which
Yes, we were. It's
was,
very, very cool.
that is so cool. I mean, that's got to be a bucket list item, right? That you
Oh, it
got out of the
totally
park right
was.
away.
Hmm.
What was the experience being on set? I mean, you guys, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, first go see the movie. I don't know why you're waiting, and also read the book, Tarantino's novel cut, when that's available to you. Check it out. But you guys play Manson girls.
Hmm.
It's a period film, and it deals with a little bit with Sharon Tate's murder and things. And you were Manson girls, which is a wild role to have,
Hmm.
and very striking in the movie. How did that come about, and what was it like?
Well, I was in my bedroom when I was just like reading the news and saw the movie announcement, and all it said was like Quentin Tarantino to make Manson murders film. And my heart dropped, and I called my sister immediately. I'm like, Kansas, we need to play Manson Girls in this film. And she's like, oh my God, he's doing that? That's insane. So basically, we were just trying to figure out how to get to him to
Yeah,
play this role. And there was an anniversary screening of Reservoir Dogs that he was going to be at. So we went, and we just went right up to him. We went, don't we look like Manson Girls? And he's just like, oh yeah, I'll make sure you guys are in the audition room. And
that is so
that was
great.
that, yeah. And then we totally thought he would forget, but he's a man of his
He's
word,
on,
super
yeah,
sweet
and
guy.
he's on the ball. That's really cool. And I mean, you guys were in scenes with some really amazing cast as well. When you So first off, did you guys go to the premiere, I hope?
I did. Kansas was out of town.
Ah, that's cool. Well, what was it? Was it cool? Was that actually, that's probably, I mean, that was a huge movie premiere.
Yeah, it's the only studio movie I've ever done. Um,
It's what a one to do.
yeah.
um, that's so cool. And I love hearing, that whole thing. It's like, it's who you know. Well, it's also the opportunities that you seek out.
Mhm.
I am pretty much harassing several filmmakers that I know on a regular basis. Like, keep
Mhm.
me in mind, and we'll see what happens. As I think I get farther away from the possibility, the more emails I send, but
I
that's
mean,
okay.
sometimes that's what you have to do. And a lot of people, you'd be surprised, are really responsive.
Yeah, well, we have Parker Love Bowling on the pod today, and that was just I think I don't even know. Did I reach out through Instagram? I think
I think
first, or
you
was it
emailed
email?
me. I don't know.
Okay, it depends. Some people, any budding journalists out there, people who want to be involved with anything they love, use social media and email. Try all angles, because some people, do one and not the other. And
Yeah, I don't really check my messages on Instagram.
Instagram. Well, and it's also when you get to a certain point, I think, when you get to a certain number of followers, it's probably best not to check them regularly. But, the other thing I wanted to talk about is, as I look at my notes here, because I got totally distracted from everything, thinking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood again, which I'm gonna have to watch. Um, when you approach writing a script, what does the script look like? Because I found that when you're writing a script that you plan to direct and make yourself, it's
Mhm.
often a very different experience than when you write something that you intend someone else to handle.
Mhm.
So what is that for you? Like, what is the Our Lady of Crucifixion script look like to you, and how did you go about crafting it?
Well, how I do scripts is I'll like write the outline longhand, but I cannot write a whole script longhand. Like I have to type it. Opposed to like if I'm writing a poem, like I cannot type it on the computer at all.
Mm,
Um, but I have written scripts for other people, and it's just all action. But when it's one of my projects, it's like notes about the costumes and the sets and like even like angles, everything.
Yeah, it becomes much more like a shooting script because you're like, well, I'm cutting out this middle step. I know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
When you so Our Lady of Crucifixion, is there any actual filming that you want to do left, or are you just in the editing polishing moment? Everything you have is what you're going to use?
Yeah, I have all the footage. I actually shot most of it like in the height of the pandemic. What is that? I shot it like in the summer of 2020. And then like this time last year, I shot additional stuff that I wanted to use for more like inserty type things. Because it just felt so unfinished. But now I think I have enough footage and it's just all about the final tweaks on the edit.
So cool. So I love the idea of doing festivals again, because festivals are actually happening again. When I guess what I would say is, okay, so you go to festivals, hopefully it does, I'm sure it will do really well. It looks fantastic. There's a lot of, well, it's unique. And I urge people, YouTube, you have the trailer up now. Go check it out. You also have a trailer for Rhododendron, which is really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Now, this is a sidetrack, this is how my brain works. Did Far West, did they ask you to do a trailer?
Not necessarily. There's a couple of the books that have trailers, or I think there was a trailer for like a group of 3 books, but it was just something that I wanted to make. My friend who took the cover photos, I just brought my camera and I had him shoot some like B-roll of the shoot to have as like archival footage, but then it looked really good, so I just made a little edit for it.
It does look really good. It looks like it made me think again, more 70s films, but Messiah of Evil, I don't know if you've ever seen that. It has like the plot is unimportant, but the visuals in that movie, you should check it out. It's super cool. Just had a re-release, and it's got that really moody, everything's sort of washed out but with high contrast, and a lot of film grain, and that is what it reminds me of. Like watching just that really short trailer, I would have known. I'm like, is this something you did? You know, and then of course you're in it, so it's pretty obvious, and it has the text and everything.
Yeah,
but
I think like all the shots I'm not in like was me shooting. Otherwise it was the photographer who did the cover pictures, as well as a lot of the images inside the book. There's
images inside, very cool.
Yeah. And then we made the score for the trailer together too.
That's so cool. So the other reason I asked is because there's a lot of debate in like the writing community of, should your book have a trailer? Because a lot of times things like a James Patterson book, paperback, will have like a trailer now. But then I also found that a trailer is just another opportunity to get the unique vision of the project across. And in this case, I'd read one of the poems that I think was published on Medium before, watching the trailer. And when I found the trailer, I watched it and was like, oh, this is cool, because it actually adds like this extra layer of perspective and mood to the piece. And so I really liked the idea of that. And I'm glad you put that out there. And I urge people to
I would say the trailer and the cover definitely speaks to the theme of the poems inside.
And I love the cover. It's got like handwritten letters on top of this photograph of you surrounded by a bunch of sort of odd look. It looks almost like you're being cornered by the world's, actually, I was gonna say biggest, but
it's supposed to be like Rosemary's Baby.
Yes, it's very much that moment, when she's looking and there's just people looking down at her, or like a really aggressive ska band. But no, it's really cool. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, the cover was based on a couple things. There's this picture of Eve Babbitt's playing chess with Marcel Duchamp, but she's naked. I love Eve Babbitt. That was kind of like the main inspiration for
the cover. I can see that now. Yeah, absolutely.
But basically this is a one photograph of me, and then this is just collaged, so it's just the same men over.
Really? That's funny. It actually, because it looks like it could have been shot as is. especially after watching the trailer and seeing the footage. I'm gonna have to take another look at that. That was really cool. So we've talked about like really these nuanced little things, I think, that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily consider in a project. And I think that comes down to why your projects that have come out so far, and you're still very young, obviously. I'm sure you and Kansas will have many more things, and you've got a bunch of films you're already involved with.
Yeah,
your
I've been
IMDb.
a good amount. I'm trying to direct my first feature this summer.
That's fantastic. Prepare to be inundated with emails from me. No. But yeah, no, it's the breadth of work you have shows a real attention to detail, and I appreciate that you're coming from what seems to be a place of creativity rather than monetary necessity. And I mean, again, we all deal with that on some level, right? Like, you want to do a feature, well, it's a budget, that's what it is, right? If you have the money, you can do the feature. Or if yeah, I have the money, but I also need to eat and pay rent and stuff. Like, we all deal with that. But when we get that moment, or when we find a way to get that moment where we can just put what we want down on paper, or in film or whatever, it can be really special. And as you said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is your only studio film to date. It makes sense to me, not because, oh, well, you haven't been in major Hollywood studio scene that much. It's more because that film is from someone who has such influence and power that he can get the money to do the passion project that he wants the way he wants it. And all the other smaller projects are somebody else's passion project. And that's why they're not big studio, because that's a higher risk for the studio. And sometimes people just want full creative control, and you can only do that if you're somehow paying the bills yourself. So do you already have an idea of what your directorial feature debut would be?
Absolutely.
You have a script?
Yes.
Oh,
But
I'm so excited.
I'm working with someone else on it because it is actually a biopic.
Oh.
So I'm kind of working with
the estate or people involved closely.
Somebody's husband.
Oh, okay. Very cool. I won't guess. I won't blow the lid. But that's really great. And I'm Colton Classic Podcast here, of course, as listeners know, based down here in Palm Springs. And we get a lot of really amazing people who come here in retirement or later in life or after someone else has passed. And they have those connections with amazing people. So we get a lot of the biopics, a lot of the documentary filmmakers down here. So that's always a really great opportunity to sort of build the history of filmmaking and creativity and people in general, and tell really interesting stories that I don't know if you agree, I feel like that's actually becoming more in vogue again. For a long time, we were focusing on purely fictional films that really, they may have some narrative theme that was important to the time, but now we're actually looking and, as I said, building history, because stuff could have happened 20 years ago, but unless you put it down on paper or put it in a movie, it's going to disappear.
Yeah.
I was talking to some fantastic people who are working on some stuff from Russ Meyer's films down here, and like it's just really and talking to Mary Warnoff, who was talking about her years with Andy Warhol, and like all of those stories will disappear if we don't tell them. So that's cool. Now, with the biopic, and especially working with someone who is close to the individual, I imagine there's a lot of, depending on the individual and how they feel, there's a lot of delicacy you may have to do with certain aspects.
Well, who I'm working with is really great, and they just I haven't given them my full draft yet for approval and accuracy. So it's not, the script's not completely complete, because I want them to kind of comb through it and be like, oh, she would never say that.
Right.
Like, oh, this isn't exactly how this happened.
That's really important too, and keeping the dramatic side effective, right? Because sometimes it's conflicting. Like, I think we just Fiend of the Pod, Peaches Christ, just did a screening with Heclina down here and some other great queens of Mommy Dearest. And watching Mommy Dearest, especially on the big screen, I had never seen it on the big screen. It's like, wow, this is amazing in many ways and so wild in some ways. And
Mhm.
the conflicting reports, like it just strikes a chord with people, right? Because you're dealing with someone who really existed and
Yeah.
people know that person, knew that person. And so when you actually have them on screen, um, you had people saying, yep, that you nailed it. And other people like, this is a defilement. It is a lie. It is incredibly. And so it's just fascinating to see that, especially, I mean, Joan Crawford is a very divisive character.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that movie's pretty accurate to the book. There's like just a couple things that were embellished, like
Sure,
the
sure.
whole choking scene.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's pretty spot on. And actually, there's fucked up shit in the book where I was like, why isn't this in the movie? This is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because then you have, you know, the family differs, right? The two later adopted children are like, that didn't happen. And of course, you know, her daughter who wrote the book is like, yes, it did. And her brother is like, yeah, it did happen. And then other people, this is ridiculous. I think Betty Davis, you know, notoriously didn't like Joan Crawford, was like, she didn't deserve that. You know, and it's like, well, that's easier to say when she's dead and you don't have to do about that. But yeah, anyway, so it's just really fascinating. And I can't wait to hear more about the film that you want to do and what you're working on.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully it will come together soon.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, now as we're getting close to this wrap up, I just want to say, definitely everybody listening here today, go to farwestpress.com and check out Parker Love Bowling's new book, as well as the
Thank
book
you.
of letters that she did with Kansas. What's the book of letters called again?
It's called Pre-Written Letters for Your Convenience.
Pre-written letters for your convenience. I love it. It sounds sort of like a Wes Anderson prop, you know.
Yeah.
I love it. And then of course, Cuddly Toys Companion is also there as well.
Mhm.
Don't read it until the movie comes out, but absolutely buy it.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited for that. And I am just putting it out there. I really, really cannot wait for the future when you put out a collection of the shorts, because I really want to see those. I think
Yeah,
shorts are.
I was thinking of holding on to them for the greater public till I had 3.
That's sort of nice, because then you get like a sort of triptych, right? You can do, you could even have a really, you know, great narrative device, beginning and ending framing story, you know.
I mean, I also I make a lot of documentary shorts as well that I haven't released, like kind of in the vein of Less Blank.
Very
Um,
cool.
but definitely gonna wait till I have a bigger collection of those as well.
Well, it's neat to know that things are present and not available yet, because I you know, talking with people, is, for example, the Warhol Museum, you know, there's just like, there is hundreds of hours of material
Mhm.
that is just not, people don't know it exists. It's available, you know, you can check it out in that case, but like it exists. And to know that there are things that are coming out helps, especially, you know, we're all post-COVID. There's a drought of things. Some amazing things came out of COVID. As you said, you filmed a lot of your last short, but like there also has been a glut. We couldn't work together in the way we did before, you know, like there is, I mean, there's pluses. We're getting more foreign films into big theaters because they don't have enough to show. But at
Mhm.
the same time, that lack of material, I think, got a lot of us, especially in the film criticism world, sort of like, ho hum, you know, let's dig in the archives, let's find something else, and which is kind of ridiculous, because there's, you know, 100 years worth of film that we could continue to watch and talk about. But it's nice
Yeah,
to know
talking
that
about
there's more
movies is
coming
my
out.
favorite thing to do.
It's you can't, I always, for these videos, those of you watching on youtube.com, when this becomes available, as our whole catalog will be uploaded by the end of the year, you can't see behind me, but the Colton Classics studio is filled with stacks and stacks of books and movies, of
Mhm.
which a fraction have been touched upon, and it's a never-ending journey. That's
Is there
to
a
me,
favorite?
that's a favorite movie, or
Mhm.
a favorite movie. You're cutting the quick here. I honestly don't think there is a favorite. I know as a host, I could pick some of my favorites, and then the rest of our panelists would completely disagree and pick their own. But I have some favorites from that we've covered on the pod, and I think I would actually pick, if we're going not contemporary, I would
Mhm.
go with William Friedkin's Cruising with Al Pacino. I think that was actually quite a brilliant film, even if it's messy and had problems. And then I also, for a mainstream pick, Nightcrawler was very, very good and really upsetting. But I think it speaks to our sociopathic nature these days. But there's so many, and I loved. And that last choice, I guess I would make is Nelvana's 1980s animated rock and roll opera called Rock and Rule. If
Oh
you
yeah,
haven't,
I've seen that.
I love that
Yeah,
movie
that was
so
good.
much. Yeah, and
I
I
watched
just and
that during quarantine, actually.
oh, I absolutely love it. We talked about it a bunch, and I I force everyone to watch it, and I get these things. It's the problem is though is that my wife I think hates it not
Mhm.
because she hates the movie, but because I just sing like Debbie Harry's snippets from the final song because that's all that sticks in my head well enough for me to remember, and it's just
Yeah, I
super
saw her play
obnoxious.
on Sunday.
Oh, that's so see, I'm jealous. That's one thing. Down here in Palm Springs, we have some super cool stuff. We have the best drag because everyone comes down here, and there's of course the LGBTQIA plus scene is really great down here. But and we also get a lot of great films, and people come and show their films, but we don't get the musicians that you guys get up in LA. So we have to make the trek one of
Oh,
these
Chris
days.
Stein is in Our Lady.
That's absolutely fantastic. That just means that I have to watch it, and hopefully you'll let us know when you get it. If I'm sure it's, I mean, I've seen the trailer. I know enough. It's going to get in festivals. That's not a question. Just where you want it to play. So if it plays in California, let us know. We'll definitely
Okay, great. Yeah, for sure.
we'll bully our way into some press passes and get there. Well, thank you so much for being here, Parker. This has been awesome. And when you have a next project come out, I want to have you back on because I'm going to pick your brain about it. And
Okay, great. Looking forward.
yeah, and just set my emails on junk because you're going to get a bunch of obnoxious things from me about casting. So thank you so much. And listeners, please follow Parker Love Bowling on Instagram at Parker Love Bowling, and go to farwestpress.com and pre-order the book. Are you planning to do any reading tour at all? Any bookstore
I
readings?
am. I'm going to New York in July, and I'm trying to set up a good amount of readings around the East Coast, Boston, Provincetown, Baltimore, that kind
Excellent.
of thing.
Very cool. Very cool. You always got to hit Newbury Comics, Bull Moose Music, all those things. Of course, I would
Yeah.
love. That's fun stuff too. All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell people about before we sign off?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Just keep an eye out. Things are coming down the pipeline.
Pre-order my book.
That's right. And it's available for pre-order now, but it actually releases when?
June 21st.
June 21st. Awesome. So
And
pre-order
it
it, get
will be
that copy.
available in stores as well.
Excellent. Get that copy, and then you can go to a reading and have Parker sign it. I'm sure that, your hands will be cramped by the end. All right. And listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. We'll be back with another pairing of mainstream and cult films to discuss with our panel next week. And to play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.